So, yes. Uh, so basically, uh, let's talk about how we understand development in the current situation, the current phase of human knowledge. Uh, Especially for economists, development is more like higher incomes. Any area where people who have higher incomes, that area is called a developed area where there are lots of investments coming in, and it is perhaps generating some employment, or it is attractive for people who are seeking employment. So development is usually uh, defined as something where people have more money on their disposal, and they have many commodities and many gadgets to play with, or many things in their houses. So development is something like this, which we all see. However, there are other ways and means, there are other perspectives to look at development. And one of them is perhaps to see all these things, higher incomes, investments, and employment opportunities, as means to live a life which one values. These are not end in itself. Higher income is not end in itself, or attracting investment for the sake of investment is not end in itself, or generating employment or any kind of employment is not end in itself. It is mean towards living a life which one values actually. So we will define it later. What is the process by which people actually identify the life that they can actually uh, they want to live. Uh, so far, the way development has been defined, or has been trying, people have been trying to understand it, especially John Neville Keynes. He basically thought about development in three distinct uh, kind of categories. One, thinks that perhaps development is something normative, it is ethical, what type of development you require. And then he tried to understand development as a process by which you generate evidence, you collect data, and you tell that higher incomes, investments, employments, and stuff like this is there. And then development is to understand development is to see in terms of its predictive predictions, that how this kind of development or this kind of work, this kind of higher income in this sector, investment in this sector will lead towards uh, a certain type of outcomes. So whatever way you look at development, maybe from the normative ethical point of view, in which you differentiate between development of the elite or development of the poor, development of maybe a certain sector of the economy which does not generate employment for people, for many people, but it creates uh, higher end technology in which labor displacement happens. So, or you look at development from the data point of view, or you look at from the predictive sense, there is always an element of value judgment, which is rarely which is not acknowledged usually. So development is not something neutral. Development is something which has some intrinsic value. It empowers some people, it disempowers some people, it empowers certain groups of people, it disempowers certain groups of people. Today's winners, the group of people or the people, individuals who are winners today, after the development process may not be winners later, or those who are losers, those who are not winners now, they will always be winners in the next phase. So basically, there is always a value judgment involved in understanding what is development. For example, if you look at poverty, when we want to address the issue of poverty, we try to understand whether have we want to change the levels of income, we want to address people's purchasing powers, or we want to address there are certain basic needs that have to be fulfilled. So if you look at income as a predictor of development, then you will have different set of policies. And if you look at basic needs, then there's a possibility that you have different kind of policy interventions. So basically, how you look at development, it influences what kind of policies that you will have in your country. Yeah. So after discussing this, what is development, the next thing which is important to understand in this context of this lecture is that what is public policy then? Public policy is perhaps which aims to create and sustain improvements in a society, in a country, in a state. And this public policy always has certain elements of uncertainty. You never know how things will actually turn out. And there are always trade offs that you have to decide uh, between two valued objectives of a policy. For example, whether you want to address question of inequality in education, but there is a possibility that you have to decide while allocating funds, you have to decide between education at the primary level or education at the tertiary level. Education at the primary level may be able to address certain inequalities at the lower strata of society as well. But tertiary education, on the other hand, it may produce more efficient outcomes, but it will benefit more to the elite, those who have already those individuals who are already accomplished to a certain extent, and they will get more benefits out of it. And there are also complexities in public policy when you develop public policies, which emerge because of certain social, political, cultural, and economic contexts. Look at the issue of privatization, for example. Why you want to privatize, or why you want to give subsidy to certain sectors. So all these things actually influence policy options. However, if you look at, as we discussed earlier, when you are deciding about public policy, you try to understand what has to be improved, because public policy is basically designed to create and sustain improvements. So you basically try to address the basic central question of what has to be improved. For example, if your aim is poverty reduction, so for a public policy professional or public policy analyst, the issue is how poverty must be defined. If you define poverty as income per se, you will have different type of interventions. And if you define poverty, as I told you earlier, as basic needs, then you have perhaps more intervention into food stamps, or maybe you will try to provide subsidize certain items of daily consumption rather than providing them uh, income replacements, income refilling, or providing them jobs. So basically, or you want to address national economy, you want to increase improve national economy with natural resources extraction. So basically, what is most important in public policy is the central question that how you define a problem and what policies that you want to undertake. In this sense, the normative you will actually understand this thing, which when I will explain this normative framework, why does it matter where money should go? Because you have to, when you decide about allocation of resources through public policy means, then it matters. And this human development approach contextualizes all this development debate, and the central pivot of this approach is people's well-being. And I will explain it later. There is a one slide which contrasts this human development perspective and the neoliberal perspective, which has been and partially also dominant in our public policy arena. So human development perspective is more focused on the outcomes or the policy options which ultimately influence people's well-being. So usual questions which are asked while drafting public policy without not without, but the way we look at public policy issues is, the central question usually is that how it will affect economic output. So you look at all the debates going around in Pakistan or in other countries, usually the central question is that how it will affect the economic output, how it will affect GDP, the way, whatever way the GDP is measured, the kind of work, the kind of goods and services that we include in the measurement. But the central question is how it will affect GDP. Secondary concern is usually how many jobs it will create. The third is usually is that what sectors will be impacted. For example, if you look at Pakistan at the current moment, a sizable amount of subsidy has been provided to the construction sector. So they think that it will positively influence GDP, possibly it will create jobs, and it will affect many other sectors aligned with the construction or housing sector. So now you will understand in this context that how a policy decision, the trade-off, the complexity, and the decision that how what policies are required to influence for certain outcomes. Secondary question which usually comes in our mind is how the policy will affect people's quality of life. This is usually a very secondary or peripheral kind of question, but some mad guys usually ask this question that how policy will affect people's quality of life, how it will affect environment, employment, and perhaps the third and the most important, but usually not asked this question, how it will affect freedoms. For example, when you are enacting laws to regulate your information and communication technology sector, and or you are regulating uh, the offices meant for freedom of expression. So, how that policy will actually affect all these things? Or even if you are deciding about uh, putting money in a certain sector, like in construction and housing, so how will it affect freedoms of the people who will be worse off owing to such policies when you divert resources from other sectors and give it to the sector of your choice. So, but economic growth has taken as the most values normative framework for development. So far, whenever you look at public policy decisions or debates, you look around yourself. The main question is how it will affect economic output, GDP, jobs, and different sectors. The latter part, how it will affect the quality of life, is largely subservient to the first argument, and we will try to question it in our later slides, and why it is important to question the first uh, uh, question, or first normative judgment, that economic output is more important than any other consideration. So this slide actually explains a little bit about the connections between economic growth and human development progress. So if you look at the right side, the chain one, that economic growth, and there is no actually question that whether you should have economic growth or not. Economic growth is very much important, it is essential. If you have economic growth, you generate more goods and services, then you can have the distribution of income. Then this distribution actually affect household income and poverty rates. And economic growth actually generates potential for government expenditures and government revenues and then expenditures uh, to be spent on social allocations, uh, and for other kind of allocations on priority issues, priority areas. And this actually leads towards human development, or human development improvement function. That once you have resources, once you have more goods and services, government has more revenues, then it can spend more money on human development. But it has to be, this connection is not automatic, I will tell you later. But theoretically, this should be the process, that you have economic growth and you give this money, try to improve distribution and provide it at the household level. Household incomes increase, poverty rates go down. Government spends money on social allocations, on infrastructure development, which actually promotes human development. And from human development, this is the perspective, that the arrow on going on the left side is capabilities of labor, managers, and entrepreneurs. Then choice of technology, local adaptation, and innovation. These are all human development expenditures in which increase capabilities of people to function. And kindly register this word, capabilities to function, because we will use these terms in later slides as well. So capability to function, now capabilities, human development, money generated through economic growth must go into human development progress, or human development improvement in human development function, so that you have capabilities in your labor, continuous improvement in capabilities of labor, managers, entrepreneurs, and ultimately you have some foreign and domestic saving and investment things coming in, and level and composition of exports and outputs increase. You have export diversification, you have import diversification, your economy generates jobs, your economy generates opens new sectors, your economy uh, tries to reach new equilibrium. uh, so from here, assumptions for economic growth for development. Now, the first assumption that we I showed on the first slide, that was that economic growth is usually the primary thing, primary normative, is a normative framework, and the primary like argument for development. However, you will see that this is not always the case. For example, assumption one is that a higher GDP per capita is necessary for human flourishing. The whole neoclassical economics, to a certain extent, argues this case, that a high GDP per capita is necessary for human flourishing. Actually, if you look at this table, for example, Saudi Arabia has the highest GDP per capita in these countries which are sampled here: Saudi Arabia, Uruguay, Russia, Costa Rica, Vietnam, Morocco. But for example, if you look at female literacy rate, ultimately what should have happened, that A GDP per capita must have influenced positively almost all the sectors. But if you, for example, look at female literacy, Saudi Arabia 76%, Uruguay with less GDP per capita but higher on female literacy. And look at the other indicator, for example, life expectancy. Expectancy, Costa Rica is at the fourth level, but life expectancy is higher, 78.5. Russia, which is even higher on per capita, but their life expectancy is lower. So basically, what our argument here is that we should try. There is a scope, or there is a gap in understanding that GDP per capita is necessary for human flourishing. Many other countries have shown that even if the GDP per capita is not has not increased, but human flourishing, they have kept pace with human flourishing. Their population is happier than the countries who have higher GDP per capita. So this is one of the examples, and the table actually questions the assumption that a higher GDP per capita is necessary for human flourishing. The second assumption is that families with a good income will not be deprived in other dimensions. Actually, if you look at this table, that for example, percent of people who are not income poor but are capability deprived is higher in India. For example, adults, 60% adults who are not income poor, but they have they are lagging behind in other capabilities. Their capabilities deprived. Capability to function, capability to move around, may not be able to, uh, they may not be very much literate, as education is one of the factors, that they have incomes, but they are not educated enough. So basically, what it argues, this table argues that despite having higher income, it is possible that your education levels are not high enough. There is a gap. 60%, 40% is filled, 60% is still empty. So if you look at the same thing, nutrition and health, 53% of the households who are not income poor, they still are malnutrition. They are still affected by malnutrition. They are still underfed. They may still have health issues. So this is basically the second assumption. That the first assumption was that if you have higher GDP, you will have human flourishing. This connection is not there. The second assumption, that families with good incomes will not be deprived in other dimensions, is also not true. So despite having higher income, your families can be deprived in many other dimensions, and these dimensions are something which have actually uh, given us multi-dimensional poverty index, in which basically which goes beyond GDP calculations. It tries to understand poverty as multi-dimensional phenomena. The third assumption is that economic growth will automatically reduce other kinds of poverty, such as malnutrition. Basically, this assumption is also not unambiguous. There are lots of avenues, lots of gaps which needs to be addressed and needs to be improved through public policy, which we will talk about later. The expected spillovers have been fairly scarce with respect to several key variables. For example, here I am giving two examples. India has experienced 15 years of boundless economic growth. Yet in 1998, 1999, 47% of children under the age of 3 were undernourished. Weight for height was used as an indicator of malnutrition. So their stunting, they had the incident of stunting despite having boundless economic growth. And by the way, India has consistently grown what is called Hindu rate of growth, 2.5%, 2%, for 40, 60, 40, 50 years. And then it had robust economic growth after liberalization and other things. But still, that growth, economic growth, did not automatically translate into human development, which one of the indicators is population having enough to eat. Even China, it is many research studies show that even in China, steady and impressive economic growth has not been accompanied by startling health inequities and deprivations, particularly in rural areas. Because China is again a model where you divert resources from the rural areas to the urban areas, and urban areas are designed as center of growth or engines of growth. You make rural areas worse off for at least for a certain period of time, and you make urban areas more attractive and more like centers of growth. However, you create these kind of inequalities and deprivations despite having economic growth. So the last argument about China is something which is that despite having economic growth, poverty can also increase at the same time. So economic growth and poverty can coexist. This is very, very interesting kind of uh, uh, empirical evidence which is there, that growth and poverty can coexist. So you have to have certain kind of policy instruments which directly attack poverty. You cannot rely on economic growth only, which is the dominant uh, normative framework till at this moment. Number four, assumption that data for income and expenditures are better than poverty data. Poverty data is something which is sometimes calculates non-monetary indicators as well. In public policy, this is also being questioned right now, that you cannot really rely on income and expenditures as a better data than poverty data. So many issues in computing prices are non-market, because most of the time consumption is actually supported by non-market transfer of resources from one family to the other, and from different other social protection mechanisms in society. So this assumption of economic growth for development, that data on only income and expenditures are enough and better than poverty data. Assumption 5, it is easier to promote economic growth than human flourishing. Policy circles, they say that economic growth is easy. You bring certain type of technology, certain type of investments, and human flourish. This is easy, and you can do economic growth, and you can leave this human flourishing to the market or to the other institutions to respond. However, if you look at the Commission on Growth and Development, their report, they said that the idea that in 1990s that trade liberalization, privatization, deregulation, financial liberalization, or better public sector governance can perhaps improve economic growth and maybe positively influence human flourishing. But using the word of William Easterly, growth has still been elusive. Despite all these policy measures, economies either did not grow, or whenever they did grow, it did not lead towards human flourishing. It enriched some people got rich, some people started overconsumption, and later the country went into boom and bust cycles. And this is what we saw, that in September 2008, the credit crunch, which actually swept across the whole world, gains from growth were really gone down the drain. And this is what perhaps you are seeing in Pakistan as well. Pakistan is a very interesting textbook case of economic growth not leading towards human flourishing or human development. This is why William Easterly, again referring to this gentleman, he calls it growth without development. So you can have economic growth without development, and that growth is not a sustainable growth. It does not, it never takes up the sustainable growth path. However, if you look at countries like Sri Lanka, Cuba, there, despite having low economic growth or low scale of economic growth, their human development indicators, their longevity, their mortality rates, their education, that is much better than, even better than Pakistan and other countries of comparable levels of income. So human development, however, the conclusion of this assumption and the counterfactual is that human development, however, can be sustained even with low growth and even when growth reduction takes place. This last assumption is economic growth can be sustained without considerations for human flourishing. As I showed you the chart in the earlier uh, slide, that economic growth has to translate into economic human development in order to be a sustainable growth, to take a sustainable growth pattern. Because if you have population who have good quality education, those who have better health, their disease burden is less, then their mental functions, their physical functions, their capabilities, they, they become agency for change. Otherwise, economic growth through investments, through whatever means, uh, injecting money in one sector, giving subsidies to one sector, and then everything will become boom and bust. And this is what Pakistan has also been experiencing. This assumption has been challenged by a study, Stewart and Rannis, who demonstrated that countries that have experienced economic growth but whose population continues to suffer from low levels of education and health were not able to sustain that growth in the long term. So basically, you need to have equality in terms of education and health conditions of the society so that you can sustain higher levels of growth. Less educated or inadequately educated or irrelevantly educated people all become burden on your economy. Later, at the later stage, you squeeze the market, you don't expand the market, you don't create buyers, you create dependents basically. So in order to have buyers, in order to have market expanding, you need to have population with good quality education, good quality healthcare, and some other institutional arrangements which we'll talk later. The only countries that were able to sustain growth were those that had previously invested in health and education of their people. So basically, these health and education sectors are equality enhancing sectors or equity enhancing sectors. If you invest money, you design social policies specially designed to improvise these public health systems and public education systems, you create uh, you create momentum for higher levels of growth where more people take part in generating goods and services for the economy. So your economy actually expands by investing in health and education. Their gestation period may be higher, may be longer, but you can sustain growth only by focusing on health and education, which are basic two pillars of human development. Therefore, human flourishing and the impact of policies on people's lives are the fundamental concerns of human development. This is why we say that we are more focused on people's life. We are not really focused on GDP, which is important, but that is a means towards achieving higher levels of higher achievements in human development and the core of what is known as human development and capability approach. So you have to increase capabilities of people to function. So now I take you to the three basic central concepts of the capability approach, which was actually which was taught by Amartya Sen, and in Pakistan, Dr. Mahbubul Haq, he operationalized the concepts of human development and capability approach and started this human development index, how to measure this. This is Dr. Mabul Haq's contribution in designing that those instruments uh, for measurement, for public policy measurements. Uh, the capability approach contains three central concepts. One is functioning, the second is capability, and the third is agency. A functioning is being or doing what people value and have reason to value. So this is something that you must have adequate numeracy, literacy to function. So some basic things that you require, being well fed. So this is to start functioning. And if you are able to start functioning, then you must have the capability. Your environment should be designed in a way that you can play a role. For example, if you look at from the gender perspective, you give good education to women, you give them good food, but you don't, the system does not allow them to take part as a free person in the economic streams, then you are not you are denying them the capability to function, uh, to basically capability to utilize their true potential. And the third one is agency, is a person's ability to pursue and realize goals she values and has reasons to believe. This is something which is linked with the concept of freedom. And Amartya Sen's book on the title of the book is Development as Freedom. So agency is basically operationalizing individuals' will to realize goals and values which one has reason to value. This is related to the concept of freedoms. So from economic growth, I just try to recap that we try to understand how development is actually thought, that it is perhaps GDP, it is perhaps economic growth, it is perhaps GDP per capita. But actually, this is something which is not end in itself. You need to have the higher circle or higher loop of uh, a loop of creating better society in which this all GDP and human accumulation at the individual level, it can function properly. So that is encapsulated in human development and capability approach, and it has different set of measuring development towards this goal. So now, basically, I try to make a point that functioning is important, capability is important, and agency is important, because I will link it with how policy analysis is actually conducted with this perspective. There are four principles that any policy, public policy that you are designing, it must have these four. Uh, uh, if you're designing with human development and capability approach perspective, so it has four principles. One is equity, and this equity is the question basically which relates to justice as fairness. I give you an example. uh, Aristotle was asked this question, that there are certain fruits available in society and they want to distribute amongst the Greeks. And Aristotle was asked this question, that how we should distribute these fruits. He said that give equal amount of fruits to everyone. So create equality, give equal number of fruits to everyone. If you are giving one, give one to everyone. But then the question was that we have certain very good quality, high quality fruits. Whom should we give it? He responded that you should give it to those who can play it in an excellent manner, those who are really experts, so they can really make use of it. But then the question that emerged, that why not give these fruits, the high quality fruits, to those people who have interest in it, those who want to develop their skills and become the master flute players? He had no answer to it. This question of equity or social justice or justice as fairness, this is something where public policy has to go. Why blacks should be given priority or given some specialized seats to get enrolled in good quality institutions, education institutions. Why they should be provided good quality healthcare. Why, if even if they don't have at this current moment, if they do not have ability to pay, so market or public policies designed on a market principle, they will keep them inequitous. They will keep them excluded from the main from becoming full human being or going towards human flourishing. They will not be able to enjoy the kind of freedoms or the kind of functioning or capabilities the rest of the society has. So equity is basically related with the question of justice as fairness. The second principle is efficiency. This efficiency is not exactly the neoclassical economics talks about cost benefit analysis or something like this, input output ratios. This efficiency is more about this efficiency argument in human development capability in this parlance. This is more about uh, you designing public policies which actually increase human development. They make people more efficient. They increase their capabilities to function. And the third base principle of human development and capability approach is participation. This participation has enlarged meanings in human development and capability approach. It is not merely coming and joining a discussion. This is perhaps more. This is more inclusionary in terms of agenda setting, because power operates in a very different manner, and participation with human development and capability approach, with freedoms, these notions actually attack distribution of power in society as well. So participation means, for human from a human development perspective, participation means meaningful participation in setting the agenda, that what should be discussed on the floor, and then deciding about the outcomes as well, that how this public policy should be designed to create equity and efficiency in society, not merely as economic growth or the new neoclassical way of looking at things. And the fourth important principle of this human development capability approach is sustainability. And sustainability, environmental sustainability is part of this, because that means living a healthy life, living all species, all everyone on this earth uh, is able to sustain itself, to have not only species will continue, but individuals also stay well and healthy. So the, the sustainability, not only environmental in the environmental sense, but also in the sense of building those kind of skill sets, those kinds of basic capabilities by which you can continue to function for a long period of time. Healthy life, active life, your participation in decision making processes, ability to influence systems of governance, ability to influence resource allocation by means of public policy things. So equity, efficiency, participation, and sustainability. These are four principles for this human development capability approach while discussing public policy. Am I clear to this point?
Yes, yes, sir.
Improvements or progress are assessed in terms of capabilities, hence policies should promote capabilities. This is basically the notion, the main saw by which you try to dissect all policies, be that trade policy, be that labor policy, be that your privatization policy, be that your social protection policy. So now perhaps you have handle to understand these kind of policy environments. I give you I will leave this presentation with you. You can study it later as well. Human development approach on the left hand tries to understand expansion of human freedoms as objective. However, the neoliberalism, they think perhaps maximization of economic welfare is the objective. Freedom of choice understood as human capabilities and functions. It is not merely the satisfaction of preferences. Human development takes it a little bit higher. It tries to make human agency more empowered and more in a position to decide things. Emphasizes all human rights, whereas neoliberalism emphasizes on political and civil rights. So human development approach is guided by concerns for equity and justice, whereas neoliberalism is guided by the concerns for economic efficiency. So while this is the fourth point is perhaps the most contentious ground on public policy issues. That whether you want economic efficiency as a goal, as an end in itself, or you want through these economic interventions, because every economic intervention is there. There is no such thing as free market. There is always some strings which are not visible. There are always things there. Government, any even flow of information influences market functions of markets. So the people who say that free market is perhaps the best resource allocator, they forget about the role of information, the role of price setting, the role of different non-formal institutions in designing the structure of the market. So human development actually understands these kind of concerns, and they say that whatever the way you regulate the market or govern the market, the outcome must be equity and justice. Majority of the people, and perhaps all people, must be treated fairly. The, so that is basically the idea. Health and education are intrinsically valuable. Neoliberalism looks at health and education as investments. And you see that this is what has happened in Pakistan and many other developing countries who have been through these neoliberal kind of reforms, which we call structural adjustment reforms. Structural adjustment reforms or structurally adjusted economies are basically neoliberal economies. So what we try to understand that health and education are intrinsically valuable. And then there is a related concept which we will not talk right now, but you can explore it later. That is human security. Why human security is more important and how it leads towards national security. National security does not create human security, but human security creates national security. So your allocations for health and education, particularly the areas which are underdeveloped or segment of society which are underdeveloped, underserved. So why it is important to invest in equality enhancing kind of interventions? Because health and education are basic endowments. If these endowments are not there, you cannot create free societies or free individuals. So you can actually perhaps look at it later as well. Now I come to, from this, having discussed this human development perspective, human development actually does not come with a very set kind of principles. What it tells you, it gives you a perspective by which you can decide any policy or any public sector intervention. So the public policy process, Michael Hill, his famous book, he basically, now I'm coming to the practical sort of things of policy analysis, giving you, after giving the framework or the sort of philosophies behind or perspectives behind these analytical tools. Michael Hill basically he distinguishes analysis of policy from analysis for policy. He argues that the analysis of policy is studies of policy content, description and explanation of the genesis and development of particular policies, how a policy emerged, how it was implemented, and what the results were. So this is how you basically analyze an existing policy. Then studies of policy outputs, explanation of the levels of expenditure or service provision. These are basically part of, in the development sector, this is part of the evaluation processes that we evaluate the impact of certain policies on different segments of society or their own results framework, how they, what they actually wanted to achieve and how far they achieved it. In studies of the policy processes, at the same time, public policy process involves that how policy was actually decision making process was rolled out. And if you look at this thing, how policy decisions are made and how policies are shaped in action, if you look all these things from a human development perspective, you will reach different conclusions. And as compared to any other kind of perspective or any kind of philosophy that you take to look at analysis for analysis of policy. So if you look at, for example, trade policy of Pakistan, you can see that how Pakistan, government of Pakistan allocated resources or concessions to which segments of the economy, uh, and it was able to, for example, what we call current account balance. How they managed it? Which sectors were worse off because of higher tax rates? Which sectors were worse off because of devaluations? So, and perhaps giving too many subsidies to the textile sector, how it has impacted other sectors as well. The second thing which Michael Hill he brings in is analysis for policy. That when you are making policies, uh, what kind of instruments that you can use? Evaluation, analysis of the impact the policies have on population, then information collection, process advocacy. When you are doing analysis for policy making, then you do all these kind of things. You conduct evaluations, you collect information, you collect do process advocacy so that more people are included, and then you do policy advocacy that these type of policies must be made uh, for the larger interest of society. These are my last two slides before we start having some discussion on it. Uh, Eugene, she actually wrote a very nice book on how to conduct uh, public policy analysis. So basically, what she argues is that without diagnosing its causes and proposing a solution, try to describe the problem. For example, if you are trying to analyze, uh, say, uh, education policy in Pakistan, so you can start by describing the problems. For example, you may perhaps try to say that schools are not adequately staffed. So you don't need to really go into the details of why it is not. Just try to understand to describe the problem. This is the first part of it. Then assemble the evidence, gather information in the form of factual data which has meaning. And this is something which is perhaps very important but usually overlooked. Assemble the evidence. The kind of evidence that we get through different state sponsored public surveys are not really measuring the thing that you want to measure. That is policy relevant. If you look at most of the surveys that you see in household surveys, and these are come very late after 2 years, possibly, and most of the time they do not tell you exactly what needs to be done, what is the issue behind it. So assembling the evidence, that is one of the most important things, that what kind of evidence that you require and how that you will hire. After collecting the evidence, what he argues, that construct the alternatives. When you are doing public policy analysis, then you have to construct. This is where, in the start of my presentation, I said that there are always trade-offs. So you have to construct alternatives, that you go option one, option two, option three, and then you can calculate uh, later that how you will select which intervention is better. Each alternative must address not only the basic intervention strategy, but also indicate how the strategy will be financed and implemented. For example, at this moment, we are working on revamping uh, drug inspection systems in Pakistan. So we are trying to understand uh, that what alternatives are available. For example, are current institutional arrangements sufficient, or we need different other type of institutional arrangements? What type of institutional arrangement can help us generate finance or access finance from other sources, from the government sources or donors? And can this be implemented in the current institutional framework, or we need to design certain frameworks by which we can implement it? So we are creating alternatives at this moment, constructing alternatives. Fourth is select the criteria. Then I talked about, for example, this selection of criteria is also perhaps very important and central. This is where human development perspective actually comes into play. It actually helps you in defining the problem, because you will look at education from a different perspective now. You will try to assemble evidence with a different perspective. Perhaps you will try to assess more. For example, if girls are not educated despite their parents having enough money to spend on them, then the basic postulate that income leads to higher human flourishing is not there. So now, as with the human development perspective, you will try to understand what are social reasons, what are cultural reasons, what are other political reasons that the money is not going towards a certain gender. Uh, so with human development perspective, you broaden your range of evidence, and you broaden the range of problems and also solutions. Then you have to select the criteria. The criteria, perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, equity, uh, efficiency, participation, sustainability. These all these things actually give you some elements to look at, that how you should decide. For example, we were thinking. I give you example of the drug inspection mechanisms. We were thinking of generating finances for the authority that will administer drug inspection mechanisms. And we try to understand the spread of market in the province. But we could see that almost 40 to 50% of stores or pharmacies are located in Lahore. Very less are in other cities. And if they are close to the major hospitals, or close to where all people are already uh, served well. So we thought that we should increase license fee or renewal fee where market is already saturated, and we should try to give some relaxation in the areas where the government wants these pharmacies or facilities of good quality medicines be available. So we should try to give some leverage over there. So by means of these methods, you not only mop up more finances, but you also increase equity or uh, availability of medicines in the underserved areas. So the selection criteria was basically spread of the market, and any intervention which create which increase which positively influences equity. The fifth uh, step which Eugene has mentioned is project the outcomes, determine as far as possible the benefits and cost of policy options, indicate the values and dimensions of the indicator to assess the outcome. So the fifth part of your policy analysis is basically predictive, as we mentioned earlier in my first slide, that it is normative, that you may like to use human development capability approach, then data, which is positive sense of a policy, that you collect data to actually in the light of that perspective, and then you predict the outcomes of your public policy with a view that these will be the outcomes: equity, efficiency, participation. Participation is not really the outcome, but it can be when you empower people. So empowering them, being part of the policy process, is also. The sixth step is confront the trade-offs, measure trade-offs across outcomes rather than alternatives. So basically, what she argues that you should decide using outcomes, that what you will gain after spending more money in education and health, or maybe enabling environment for all genders to participate equally in uh, uh, economic activities. The last, it decides like the best alternatives given the analysis, and the last one is tell your story. So basically, what I have tried to make a case for using human development, understanding development in a critical way, that economic growth uh, is not the only criteria, or not the only formative normative framework, but there are other frameworks which you can use to do public policy analysis, and one of them, and which is emerging in a very robust manner, that is human development and capability approach. And there are there is a body of knowledge as well as empirical evidence which says that economic growth does not always lead towards a better society or human flourishing. You have to have certain well-intentioned human development interventions in the economy, interventions in public policy, and then I tried to give you this eight-step approach, that how practically you can do this public policy analysis. And thank you very much for listening. And
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zubair. Such a wonderful presentation. So we have 20 minutes for questions. So जिन के सवाल हैं वो अगर succinctly phrase करें, so that would be helpful. We can take more speakers that way. So please raise your hand if you wish to ask a question, and meanwhile the fellows do that. Sir, मेरा एक सवाल है. So based on your wonderful explanation on development as freedom, आप मुझे थोड़ा बता सकते हैं कि with regards to this perspective, where does China fall exactly? क्योंकि वो completely वो neoliberal वाली development में भी fall नहीं कर रहा, considering there was a feature about civil and political liberty. But then it's not also that complete human development, despite the equity that I think the Chinese model does, with my limited understanding, it does bring about. So it's a very unique kind of economic takeoff when it comes to China.
Yeah, I think so far as development as freedom is concerned, China still lags behind in that. They did not allow people to speak. They allow people to consume more. They allow people to live, uh, uh, have better consumption patterns or to increase their consumption. Uh, but still, there is a lot of gap between what people can say. For example, if you might have seen this thing that Jack Ma, he tried to raise uh, he had some difference of opinion with the Chinese regime, and he has been shut down, or he has been asked to keep quiet. So basically, Chinese model is pro growth model, but China has invested heavily in empowering their population with economic impetus. They have lifted enormous amount of people from poverty, and they have brought them in the mainstream economic activities. They started with cultural revolution of Mao, and then they liberalized their economy. And however, there are some issues, there are horizontal inequalities in China. There are certain um, citizen groups. There are certain areas which are still not mainstreamed. They are discriminated against, and but Chinese regime is very sensitive about it. They don't allow others. And if you allow me to borrow example for Amartya Sen, uh, China, basically, this freedom argument is very comprehensive argument. If you look at Amartya Sen's work, uh, he worked actually on famines, and from famines he tried to understand that what role freedom of expression or freedom of information or democracy as a culmination of it plays in controlling or stopping famines to happen. So he gave example of China as well. That if you when you stop information flow of information or free flow of information or democracy in the sense, you actually create situations in which people can die of hunger, and people can die of hunger without being noticed. So in Indo-Pak, in the British India, and also, for example, you see that in during the 1100 years of rule, Muslim rule, there is no famine in India. But during the 200 years of the British Raj, there are at least three famines. And during these famines, Bengal was exporting rice, but people were dying of hunger. From here, he actually argues that this freedom in China, exactly the same kind of thing happened, that people misreported their uh, uh, their food uh, endowments or the reserves, the food reserves different local officials had in their localities. They misreported it to Chinese regime, and when actually things got worse off, or famine started taking its toll, then people were dying. There was no food left. So all that was exaggerated, and because there was no mechanism of accountability which comes with freedom of expression, so not having that system in place led to famines in China. Uh, so if you look at even if there are certain, I did not really did any research on it, but there were articles published in the press that this COVID, the spread, the atypical pneumonia, what was started being reported to the Chinese authorities in November, October, November. In September, cases were detected, And in November, doctors were reporting these atypical pneumonia to the health authorities. But that information was stopped because they did not want to sabotage some festivals which took place in Wuhan later. So basically, that is also a very bad case of uh, worse, worst kind of human development outcomes of that policy. That people started dying, not only in China but in other. It became a pandemic because you controlled information. You have a very heavy handed kind of regime there, and your main argument was economic prosperity, not the health outcomes. So you actually you caused a pandemic to spring. And interestingly, when Wuhan was actually lockdown not in the lockdown sense, but Wuhan was isolated from rest of the China. No other city was accessible for people from Wuhan or from other cities to come into Wuhan. But Wuhan was open for rest of the world until January. So flights were going from Wuhan to Qom to Madrid to New York to Italy, Rome, everywhere. But it was not going to Shanghai or other parts of China. So they locked their own country, but they let it go, showed as if everything is normal. So my point is that their COVID strategy was more economic growth centric rather than human development centric. And it has caused serious disruptions in the lives of people around the world. So
Thank you
maybe
for that very comprehensive answer, Dr. Zubair Saab. So, in the interest of time, we have 3 speakers. तो आप लोग एक-एक करके अपने सवाल बता दें. And I see Zubair Saab is taking notes simultaneously. So, then, he can give a comprehensive answer. So, Uzair, then Maruf, and then Umar.
Thank you, sir. I have a couple of questions, really briefly. One, you had a slide where you were comparing new liberalism with human development approach. There was a point there that said human development, it covers all human rights, whereas new liberalism, it only focuses on civil, and I think the other one was political rights. So what is it that it is not focusing on? Because civil liberties is what you said, freedom of speech and freedom of expression, freedom of publishing what you want, etc., etc. So what is it that is missing in new liberalism? That's first question. And the second question is, why is it that all the myths, all the assumptions that you mentioned, and you sort of busted them, that hey, the people think that economic prosperity would result in human development, which is not the case, and then you gave 5, 6, 7, 8 different assumptions, and sort of said that how they're not true. How come these are not mainstreamed in the media? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Uzair. Maruf, very succinctly, if I may.
If he's not around, I can ask.
Yes, Umar, please go ahead.
Thank you for the talk, Zubair. एक क्विक क्वेश्चन, ये अभी जो कंपैरिजन आपने किया है चाइना का, जो आपने डिस्कस किया उसका इंटर चाइना और जो उनकी फ्लाइट्स वगैरह बाहर जा रही थी, इसी को एक एक्सटेंड करते हुए बहुत क्विक क्वेश्चन है कि क्या जो बाकी यूरोप या नॉर्थ अमेरिका में जो न्यू लिबरल एक अप्रोच रही इस कोविड की तरफ, बिकॉज ऑफ द वैक्सीन, उनकी डेवलपमेंट, उनके अप्रूवल एक सर्टेन टाइम पे आना और वगैरह वगैरह, वर्सेस द चाइनीज कंट्रोल ऑफ दिस वायरस, क्योंकि उनका जो आखिरी बंदा कोविड से जिसकी डेथ हुई वो बैक इन मई था ऑलमोस्ट, मतलब कि उन्होंने इस चीज़ को कवर कर लिया, उनकी सेमिनीज बता रही हैं कि सब कुछ. तो इट मीन्स के जो भी इनका मॉडल था इन व्हाट्सोएवर केस ये बेहतर था, या हम ये एज्यूम कर सकते हैं कि जो स्टैटिस्टिक्स हम देख रहे हैं दे आर नॉट करेक्ट?
थैंक यू उमर, दैट वाज अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग क्वेश्चन. जवेरिया, आप भी बता दें जल्दी से अपना सवाल.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. My question is related in the context of policy making in Pakistan, especially with relevant to the third tier of the government, local government. So, if the policy is aimed to be designed from the perspective of human development, how much decentralization of decision making should be there, especially in the context of the Pakistan? Thank you.
Thank you, Javeria. If there's anyone else, Zubair Saab, over to you. Whenever you're done.
تھینک یو جی. پہلا کویشچن یہ تھا کہ جو ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ ہے وہ آل ہیومن رائٹس کی بات کرتے ہیں، جبکہ نیو لبرل جو ہیں وہ سول اینڈ پولیٹیکل رائٹس کی بات زیادہ کرتے ہیں. ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ کا فار ایگزامپل دیکھیں، ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ والے ہیلتھ اور ایجوکیشن کو بیسک ہیومن رائٹ لیتے ہیں. دے ڈونٹ لیو اٹ ٹو دی مارکیٹ میکینزمس، ابیلٹی ٹو پے پہ نہیں کرتے. وہی کہتے ہیں کہ یو شوڈ ہیو دی اسٹرکچر فار پبلک ہیلتھ اینڈ پبلک ایجوکیشن good enough to create equalities in society, and you should give them all the rights in terms of the living conditions. جو نیو لبرلزم کے جو رائٹس کا کانسیپٹ ہے، فار ایگزامپل جو ان کے سول رائٹس کا بھی ہے، وہ مطلب یہ اسٹیٹ کے رول کو سمجھتے ہیں کہ اسٹیٹ نے کا بیسک رول جو ہے وہ لا اینڈ آرڈر کو مینٹین کرنا ہے اور لوگوں کی جو پراپرٹی کے رائٹس ہیں ان کی پروٹیکشن کا کام ہے. سو دے فوکس مور آن وٹ کریٹس اکنامک ویلیو اینڈ اکنامک ویلیو ان ٹرمز آف انکم گروتھ. یہ ٹرمپ کی بھی جو جتنی آپ کو پالیٹکس نظر آئے گی اس میں سے جو زیادہ ان کا ایمفسس رہا ہے وہ یہ کووڈ کو بھی جس طریقے سے انہوں نے، میری اسیسمنٹ میں، یو مے ہیو ڈفرینٹ اوپینین، میری اسیسمنٹ میں انہوں نے بہت عرصہ پہلے سے ڈسمنٹل کرنا شروع کر دیا تھا. وہ تمام ادارے، وہ تمام انٹرونشنز، وہ تمام میکنزمز جو پینڈیمک کو مانیٹر کرتے ہیں گلوبلی، انہوں نے ریٹرینچ کرنا شروع کر دیا کہ نہیں، ہم وہ جو ہمارا انٹرپرینورشپ کا ماڈل ہے، اینی ون ہو از اے سکسیزفل بزنس مین is ultimately the finest intervention. وہ ڈسٹریبیوشن پہ اتنا وہ نہیں توجہ دیتے، وہ ایکومولیشن پہ توجہ دیتے ہیں. ایکومولیشن بائی مینس آف ایکومولیشن دیر ول بی پروڈکٹیو انویسٹمنٹ ان سم ڈسٹریبیوشن. ان کا میتھڈ یہ ہے. جو ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ کا ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ نہیں، ایکومولیشن کے پروسیس کو اس طریقے سے کریں کہ ایکومولیشن ڈز ناٹ ہیو اونلی فیو سینٹرز بٹ اٹ از ڈسٹریبیوٹیڈ in a way that it creates fairness in society. It gives opportunities to people. People should not suffer because they do not have enough endowments. وہی کہتے ہیں کہ آپ ریونیو جنریٹ کر کے، ٹیکس کر کے ہائر انکمز کو، جس میں پکیٹی کا کام شاید perhaps one of the most important work، کہ جو ویلتھ ہے، جو لوگوں کے ایسٹس ہیں ان کو ٹیکس کریں، ان کی صرف انکمز کو ٹیکس نہ کریں، گلوبل ویلتھ کو ٹیکس کریں، جس پہ ابھی بات ہی چل رہی ہے، کچھ رزلٹ اس کا نہیں. تو جو ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ کا پرسپیکٹیو ہے وہ آل رائٹس ان ٹرمز آف کنڈیشنز ٹو ایکسیل ان لائف، وہ اس میں ان کا زیادہ ایمفسس ہوتا ہے کہ وہ چیزیں جو ویلتھ ایکیومولیشن کو پروموٹ کرتی ہوں، ان رائٹس کو آپ لوگوں کو کہیں کہ پراپرٹی رائٹس ہیں آپ کے یہ جیسے وہ کہتے ہیں نو ٹیکسیشن وداؤٹ ریپرزنٹیشن، سم تھنگ لائک دس، کہ جب تک آپ یہ بتائیں گے نہیں کہ پیسے کہاں خرچ ہوں گے، ہم ٹیکس نہیں آپ کو دیں گے، ہم پہلے بات کریں گے، سنیں گے، پھر آپ کو ٹیکس دیں گے. جبکہ ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ والے شاید آپ سے اس وجہ سے ٹیکس کلیکٹ کریں گے بیکاز دے وانٹ ٹو اسپینڈ منی آن بلیکس ایجوکیشن، جو کہ جو سول رائٹس والے ہیں وہ کہیں، ان کا یہ نیو لبرلز کا آئیڈیا یہ ہوتا ہے، ان کا آرگومنٹ یہ ہوتا ہے کہ آپ میرے خون پسینے کی کمائی آپ مجھ سے نہیں لے سکتے جب میں نے راتوں کو جاگ کے کی. اچھا، وہ کہتے ہیں کہ آپ نے جو یہ کیا ہے، اس کا جواب یہ پھر یہ دیتے ہیں ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ والے کہ اگر آپ نے واقعی یہ پیسے خود سے کمائے ہیں، یہ خود سے کمانا جو اس وقت آپ کی جو فیکٹر انڈاؤمنٹس آپ کے پاس ہے ساری کی ساری آپ کی پیدا کردہ نہیں ہے. اس میں بہت سا سوسائٹی کی کنٹریبیوشن ہے, بہت سے ریسورسز تک آپ کی ایکسیس ہے. وہ ایکسیس آپ کو سوشلی آپ کو اویلیبل ہوئی تو آپ نے جا کے کیا, پھر آپ نے انہیرٹ کیا. مطلب اس میں ایک بڑی انٹرسٹنگ ایک بلکہ آپ دیکھیے گا ہارورڈ یونیورسٹی کا ایک کیس ہے. ہارورڈ یونیورسٹی میں ایک کورس وہ پڑھاتے ہیں جسٹس کے نام سے, مائیکل سینڈل جو ہیں وہ اس کو ٹیچ کرتے ہیں. اس میں کافی ڈیٹیل سے اس کے اوپر بحث ہے. وہی کہتے ہیں کہ اگر آپ اب تو انہوں نے ہارورڈ کی کلاس میں اس نے پوچھا کہ آپ میں سے کتنے بچے ہیں جو ماں باپ کے فرسٹ چائلڈ ہیں. I think almost all hands were raised because they were the first child of their parent. اب simple آپ دیکھیں کہ being a first child of a family gets more resources and more attention from parents. ڈسٹریبیوشن آف ویلتھ تو یہاں سے آپ کو پتہ چل جاتا ہے کہ اس کی اپنی کوئی کنٹریبیوشن نہیں ہے پہلے پیدا ہونے, پہلے بچہ ہونے میں, لیکن اس کو ریسورس کی ایکسیس زیادہ ہوتی ہے. یہ سوشلی ڈٹرمنڈ ہے, اس کا نہیں ہے فیکٹر, یہ اس کے اور بہت سے جو اس کو انفلوئنس. سو وہ پارٹ جو اس کی اپنی ایبلٹیز کے علاوہ اس کو ملا ہے, دیٹ از ٹیکسیبل اینڈ دیٹ از ریڈسٹریبیوٹیبل بیکاز وہ ان کا نہیں ہے. جس کو یہ نیو لبرل اپنا کہتے ہیں وہ ایکچولی ان کا اپنا نہیں ہوتا, وہ سوشلی جنریٹڈ ہوتا ہے, لیکن یہ سمجھتے ہی ہیں کہ ہمارا ہے. سو وہ جو آل ہیومن رائٹس کا کانسیپٹ ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ کا ہے وہ اس طریقے سے اس کو ایکسپینڈ کرتے ہیں. اب یہ کہتے ہیں کہ آپ ہمارے بچوں, کسی کالے کے بچے کو آپ داخلہ نہ دیں, گوروں کو صرف داخلہ دیں, کیونکہ ہمارا کوئی قصور نہیں, ہمارے ماں باپ نے اگر ویلتھ ایکومولیٹ کی ہمارا تو نہیں, ہمیں کیوں آپ پینلائز کرتے ہیں. تو اس کا جواب وہ یہ دیتے ہیں کہ آپ کو پینلائز نہیں کر رہے, ہم اور اپرچونیٹیز کریٹ کریں ان کے لیے. اچھا یہ تو اس کا ہو گیا. دوسرا یہ تھا, ٹائم چونکہ کم ہے میں شاید اس پہ زیادہ وقت دے گیا. عمر جو آپ کا کویسچن تھا کہ چائنا کا جو مجھے جو فلا لگتا ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ اچھا ایک تو بڑا آسان ہے کہ جن ملکوں میں پبلک ہیلتھ بہتر ہے وہاں پہ کووڈ کنٹرول بہتر رہا ہے. مثلا نیوزی لینڈ ہے, یا آپ تائیوان دیکھ لیں, ایون ساؤتھ کوریا دیکھ لیں, اور بھی چھوٹے اور بھی بہت سے ملک ہیں جہاں پہ جو سوسائٹیز بہتر ہیں. اچھا اور انٹرسٹنگلی وہاں پہ ویمن جو ہیں وہ رول کر رہی ہیں, کیونکہ جو سوسائٹیز بہتر ہوتی ہیں وہاں پہ عورتوں کے رول کرنے کے امکان بہتر ہوتا ہے. یہ بھی کہا جا سکتا ہے کہ عورتیں بہتر رول کرتی ہیں, لیکن یہ بھی کہا جاتا ہے کہ جو زیادہ ایکوٹی بیس سوسائٹیز ہے وہاں پہ عورتوں کے لیڈرشپ رول میں آنے کے امکانات زیادہ ہوتے ہیں, اور اٹ ہیپن. تو جہاں پہ پبلک ہیلتھ انفراسٹرکچر بہتر تھا, انڈیا میں بھی ان اسٹیٹس میں جہاں پہ پبلک ہیلتھ انفراسٹرکچر بہتر ہے, کیرالا وغیرہ جو کیرالا ماڈل کے طور پہ وہ آیا, وہاں پہ پینڈیمک کنٹرول زیادہ بہتر ہے. جہاں پہ نیو لبرلائزڈ سسٹم ہے کہ آپ مارکیٹ سے انشورنس یہ وہ وغیرہ وغیرہ, اور پھر اکانومی جو ہے وہ ہر حالت میں چلنی چاہیے, لوگ بے شک جو بھی اس کے ہیلتھ آؤٹ کمز لوگوں کو نکلیں, آئی تھنک وہاں پہ اس کا امپیکٹ جو ہے وہ زیادہ بہتر نہیں ہے, وہ زیادہ نقصان دے رہا ہے. تو اس طریقے سے شاید آپ دیکھ سکتے ہیں کہ, اور چائنا نے جو مسٹیک کی ہے موسٹ پروبیبلی جان کی ہے یا ان سے ہوئی ہے, وہ یہ ہے کہ انہوں نے they let people come to Wuhan and go and spread this virus, while at the same time they had closed down Wuhan's links inside China. یہ ایک بہت امپورٹنٹ ڈٹرمنٹ تھا اس کا, کیونکہ وہ اپنے مارکیٹ کو اس کو خراب نہیں کرنا چاہتے تھے. اچھا تیسرا جو کویسچن جویریہ کا تھا وہ تھا ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ کا اور ڈیسینٹرلائزیشن کا. ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ جو ہے وہ اس طریقے سے نہیں آرگیو کرتے یہ لوگ کہ آپ اس طریقے کا کام کر لیں تو بہتر ہے. What they basically argue is a certain perspective. ڈیسینٹرلائزیشن کے حق میں بائی امپلیکیشن یہ ہوں گے ہیومن ڈیولپمنٹ کا جو پرسپیکٹیو ہے وہ اس وجہ سے کہ ڈیسینٹرلائزیشن کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ principle of subsidiarity کہ everything which can be managed locally must be managed locally and people must be part of that process. Decentralization gives you lots of avenues by which local people can actually be involved in implementation of public policy things. So by implication, what I can understand, my understanding is that human development and capability approach will not be against decentralization. It must be pro decentralization as long as it helps create equity, it empowers, it increases participation, it increases efficiency, it makes things sustainable. So they will argue for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zubair Saab. That was a very wonderful and insightful session when it comes to human development. बहुत comprehensive था और हमें आपकी engagement भी बहुत अच्छी लगी.